Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sports Lock podcast. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying your week and preparing for the fantasy football season. I have a few drafts myself this coming weekend. Kid you not, about six of them, running a ton of leagues. I do all different styles: auction, PPR, 12 man, 10 man, doing 8 man. So we're doing it all. And last week, if you didn't check out the podcast, we discussed my wide receiver, running back, tight end, and quarterback rankings. And today we're going to do sleepers, busts, and guys that I like after the preseason, and guys that kind of are falling down my rankings after the preseason. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. Shouldn't be a long one to get you prepared for your drafts this coming weekend. Normally, Labor Day is the time to draft because preseason's over and it's the week before the season starts. So we had some shift as far as free agency people getting dropped from teams and picked up from others. Sony Michel now with the Chargers. He was with the Dolphins and things like that. So there is some shakeups, people being cut, and we're going to talk about that too. But let's start with our sleepers, and we're going to start with quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. He is a sleeper for me this year. He finished quarterback 24 last year in only a few games, but had 16 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. He's also a rusher, which adds fantasy relevance. With another year under his belt, he's looking healthy and he looks good in training camp, connecting with Tyreek Hill, especially in the preseason there. He looked good as well. And Tyreek saying he's the most accurate quarterback he's been with. So I think, Tua, he can easily finish near or in the top 10, which right now his ADP is quarterback 17. So I'm definitely looking at Tua as a backup quarterback, especially if you wait a little while with that upside. Now, again, sleepers and busts. When I talk about that, if they're a sleeper, I feel like they're going to outperform their ADP. If they're a bust, doesn't mean that they're a terrible, you know, a terrible option. It just means that at that ADP, I don't like where they're going. So just keep that in mind. Just because they're a sleeper doesn't mean, oh yeah, you have to draft them and they're going to be on your starting team. And no, it just means that they'll outperform their ADP. Again, with bust doesn't mean that, in a later round, I wouldn't draft them just at where they're going. I'm not taking them. So with that being noted, let's move on to Jameis Winston. And Winston played in only 7 games last year, but an impressive 14 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions during that span. He was on pace to finish quarterback 12 around there. Right now, he's going as a quarterback 24, and which I just think is ridiculous because, again, on pace for quarterback 12, right now going quarterback 24. I wouldn't start him, but definitely a streaming option or a backup option, especially if you wait to take your second quarterback late or if you're in a deeper league. He definitely has that upside. I think he'll be closer to quarterback 15 as long as he stays healthy with that top 10 upside. So Winston is a guy that I don't see finishing quarterback 24 or any worse than that. I see him finishing in the teens somewhere with that potential top 10 upside. Moving to the running backs, Ezekiel Elliott. Now, Elliott has a ton of hate on him from last year. He wasn't as explosive. He just didn't seem the same, but you really don't say that about a guy that finished running back 7. If you would just look at the stats, you would have thought he had a great year. But and he did. He finished running back 7. And he's looked great in training camp so far. He's still going to get you 1,000 yards, 8 to 10 touchdowns per season. That's the type of guy he is. But currently he's being drafted as the RB20, which I think is ridiculous because he's never finished outside the top 12 in his career. Now, I know people are worried about Tony Pollard taking over some of the workload, and he probably will kind of dig into it some, but Pollard's been there for, 2 seasons of actually performing well and having some fantasy relevance, but Ezekiel Elliott still finished in the top 12. So I think with the lack of wide receiver that they have, that Elliott will have a few more receptions, which helps in PPR. And you can get him like in the fourth round. That's incredible value. It also, at least for me, as I'm a guy that likes to get my running backs early and wait on wide receivers. But if I want to draft like a Justin Jefferson or Cooper Kupp in the first round, I can draft a pretty decent running back in the second round and wait for a guy like Zeke in the fourth round and be happy with him at my RB2 with that RB1 upside. So I'm really liking Zeke this year at his ADP. I was like Elijah Mitchell. He played in only 11 games last year, but had almost 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns in that span. He's on pace to finish as the RB8 if healthy. With that being said, he's currently going as the RB24, which I think is, again, great value for him. And also, as of today, they let go Trey Sermon, so another running back taken away. So I think they're all in on Elijah Mitchell. Last year, they relied on Deebo Samuel to run the ball. I know they don't want him to this year. So if Elijah Mitchell can stay healthy, he's going to be a beast. And again, has a top 10 upside right now, going at running back 24, somewhere around the fourth or fifth round. Now, this guy might be my favorite draft pick this year. He might be a guy that I absolutely have to have coming out of all of my drafts, and that's Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. Last year, he was wide receiver 21, but he was a top 2 receiver in the last 6 games, exploding with an average 8 catches per game. That's a PPR dream right there. And now, after being a rookie, he's built a connection with Jared Goff, and he easily has top 10 upside. And you can get him somewhere in the fifth round, I believe, right now, which is incredible value, even as your wide receiver 2, which is kind of where I'm taking him at. You could also take him as a flex option. He has tremendous upside. That's why I had him as my wide receiver 12, if you watch last week's podcast, why I think he has such tremendous upside. In the preseason, he looked great. He had a lot of targets to him. So I just really like Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver 1 for the Detroit Lions. I think he continues this season and just kind of blows up. So he's a guy that I would leave your draft with if you can. The next guy is Alan Lazard. Now, Alan Lazard finished as wide receiver 43 last year, but now he's taken over the wide receiver 1 role with Davante Adams gone. His current ADP is wide receiver 42, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. He finished one spot worse last year, not being the number 1 wide receiver. Now he's the clear wide receiver 1. Even Aaron Rodgers said it. And they're only saying he's going to go wide receiver 42. Like, his receptions should at least double from last year or be close to it. I think he can easily finish somewhere in the top 20 if he is on that pace. And he just has tremendous upside. He has got that connection with Rodgers. And we know Rodgers likes to pick out one guy to focus on. And Lazard had some good games down the stretch at the end of the season last year. I just really like Alan Lazard at his ADP very late in drafts, who can definitely, again, have that wide receiver 1 upside. Now, tight ends, I'm looking at Tyler Higbee here. Higbee finished as a tight end 13 last year, and I don't see much of a change this year. He's currently going as the tight end 18, so it's a little bit of a sleeper. It's very tough this year picking tight end sleepers and busts. So Tyler Higbee, a little bit of a sleeper. I think he can finish closer to the top 10, which is why I have him as a sleeper. Another guy that's probably a little bit more of a sleeper would be Hayden Hurst of the Cincinnati Bengals. Since he's on the team, he's the tight end 1. And you think about his career so far, of recent, he has had to compete against Mark Andrews. He was a backup to Andrews, and Kyle Pitts. So he really hasn't had a chance to really show what he's made of, which he is a talented tight end. And this is a talented offense. Now, I know there's a lot of weapons on that team, and he's not going to get as many receptions as he wants, but Right now, going as the tight end 21, I could easily see him finish in the top 15. Definitely a guy, again, later in drafts. I usually don't wait that long to get a guy, but if, you want to wait pretty late, he's a guy that you have a chance to get and could easily be a streaming option, or who knows, he could go off. But I definitely like him as a sleeper out of the tight end spot. All right, now we jump to our bust. And so many people have this guy as a sleeper, but I have him on the other end of things. I have him as a bust. Everybody's saying he's due for a big year, but I think the opposite. We've seen him in a few games last season, and he only had 5 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. If he would keep on that pace, he will easily bust. Even if he gets somewhere, I think I projected around maybe 15 touchdowns and 13 interceptions or somewhere around there. He's going as a QB 13 right now, ahead of guys like Tua Tagovailoa and Jameis Winston that we talked about. Now, I might like Lance a little bit more than Winston, but not over Tua. So I think he'll be a bust just seeing what we did last year. I think he'll start off slow. Maybe he comes alive at the end of the season, but right now he's going possibly as somebody's starting quarterback, which I really wouldn't want. Possibly as a backup, but I just think he's going to be a bust at that QB 13. He'll be closer to maybe QB 18. Yes, Lamar Jackson is on my bust list. Lamar Jackson is expected to finish as the number 4 quarterback. That's where his ADP is right now. He finished quarterback 16 last year, missing 5 games. But in those 12 games he played, he had only 16 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. Now, he does have rushing ability, but he's not a good passer, and they want him to pass because they got J.K. Dobbins to utilize. So if you got to rely on his legs, that's not good because I want him to pass. And at quarterback 4, that's just way too high for me. I like Jalen Hurts there. I like Dak Prescott there, even Kyler Murray there. Again, if you look at my rankings last week, I had Jackson around QB 8 or 9, which I think is where he probably will be, closer to that QB 10. But just a lot of question marks, coming off an injury, not so many weapons, needing to pass the ball more, which he struggled with last year. I don't know why guys are so high on Lamar Jackson, but he's on my bust list. Now, a lot of guys have this guy on their bust list, and that's Cam Akers. Akers has battled injuries since 2020, and in that year, he had only 625 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, if he's healthy, I think at best he'll finish around RB20, but that's a real big if. Right now, he's going as a running back 14, which is just way too high. Coming off those injuries, I just don't see him being the same. Plus, you got Darrell Henderson there trying to share the load. So I'm not a fan of Cam Akers at that ADP. It's not a guy that I'm looking to draft this year. Just stay away from Cam Akers. Another guy that's on a lot of people bust lists is James Conner. Conner finished last year as an RB5, and now he did share time with Chase Edmonds, but he was really touchdown dependent. 18 touchdowns and only 752 yards. He's not much of a receiving back either, and he also hasn't played a full season in his career due to injuries. That being said, I don't see him getting anywhere near 18 touchdowns this year, maybe around 10. And as an RB12, you can't expect those same numbers. I think, again, a guy, he has the upside, but I think he hit his ceiling last year in a big way. I see him digress this season and finish closer to RB20. Now, Jalen Waddle is a wide receiver that I'm staying away from, at least at his ADP. When we take a look at wide receivers and tight ends, it's very hard to see some busts because I think that everybody's properly rated there. But I think the ADP is just a little bit too high for Jalen Waddle. Right now, ESPN is projecting him to get 218 fantasy points this season which would have been around wide receiver 23. Currently, his ADP is wide receiver 13, where he finished last year. But you have to add in Tyreek Hill, and Tyreek Hill needs some receptions. Last year, Waddle had 104. I don't think that he sees near that, maybe around 80. So that brings those down. So that's why he's a bust for me at that ADP. Just a little too high on Waddle. If he drops to you in maybe 2 rounds, maybe grab him. But I'm just thinking that this Tyreek Hill to a Tagovailoa connection is just going to take away from what Jalen Waddle did last year. I also think Deebo Samuel's a bust. He finished wide receiver 3, but that's because of his rushing ability. He rushed for 8 touchdowns, and he doesn't want to be a running back this year like he was last year. So if you take away those numbers, he would have finished somewhere around wide receiver 30 to 35. Now, I think Trey Lance is a bust. So why wouldn't I think that Deebo Samuel would be a bust? I can't and will not take him at wide receiver 5. That is just way extremely too high. Now, I did have him in my rankings somewhere around, I think, 10 or so. Let me look back. It was right at 10. So I do think he has I think he does drop a little bit because of that rushing ability. He could finish a lot worse than that. But in saying that, that's bus worthy right there. So Deebo Samuel isn't a guy that I want to spend a lot of money on in an auction league, not a guy that I'm looking forward to draft at his ADP. I'm going to be looking at a running back or a better wide receiver there. So definitely on my bust list. Now, a shocker to a lot of people probably is Kyle Pitts on this bust list. But again, tight ends of Phil are properly ranked. So it's very tough to pick here. But why do I think he's a bust? I think he's a slight bust because he only caught 1 touchdown last year. He's getting a worse quarterback than Matt Ryan. And right now they have him going as a tight end 3. Didn't happen last year. I don't think it's going to happen this year. I see him more around tight end 6 or 7. I know like he's their only guy that they have, but even in the preseason, which we'll get to in a little bit here, he didn't look that impressive. And finally, the last tight end is Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles. Goddard should see similar numbers to last year, but I think that they will go a little bit down, putting him towards tight end 12 instead of tight end 8 where he's going right now. So let's look at the risers after preseason. And a guy that I just talked about would be Tua Tagovailoa, who had 2 great starts in the preseason. He was 12 of 15 for 179 yards on the touchdown. I really liked what I saw out of him throwing the ball deep to Tyreek Hill. And I think both should move up in your rankings. Quarterback 17 on ESPN, I like him closer to quarterback 12 now. Another guy, which isn't a guy, again, that you're going to be drafting, but somebody to watch out for is Joshua Dobbs. I know it sounds really weird, but he is right behind Jacoby Brissett. And we know that we're missing out on Deshaun Watson for 11 games. So if anything happens to Jacoby Brissett, Joshua Dobbs will be the guy. In the preseason, he went 35 of 62, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. When we take a look at Brissett, he went 13 of 23, 109 yards and an interception. He didn't look good. So if something happens to Brissett or if he continues to do bad, they might look to Joshua Dobbs to take over. And in that case, I'm not saying you draft a guy and you're not going to draft a guy and you're not going to even draft Jacoby Brissett, but he's a guy to watch out for on the waivers to stream possibly week in and week out if he does play a few games. Former Pittsburgh Steeler, so maybe I'm a little biased, but I really liked what he did in the preseason. Now, running back Dameon Pierce, this video was supposed to be made before they even cut Marlon Mack. But Dameon Pierce is a guy that I drafted 2 weeks ago in a fantasy league because I liked his upside. And if we take a look at his performance in the preseason, he had 11 total carries, 86 yards, and a touchdown in 2 games. That's very good. That's almost 8 yards per carry right there, or right, it's really close to that. Now, he also went up against 2 tough defenses, against the 49ers defense and the Saints defense. So now that Mack has been cut, Dameon Pierce is the starter. He's the guy. His ADP is going to skyrocket. And before knowing Marlon Mack was going to be cut yesterday, he's going as a running back 30, Dameon Pierce. But someone who has huge upside in the eighth, ninth round, that's going to be probably at least 2 rounds higher, if not more. So I'm big on Dameon Pierce this year, a guy that you get a little bit later on that has huge, huge upside at the running back position. Another guy that's moving up my rankings and why I have him as a riser after the preseason is Alvin Kamara. Now, he is a guy that's going as a top 10 running back, but he was somebody that I was iffy on because we didn't know if he was going to get fined, if he was going to be suspended. So I was a little iffy. But if we take a look at the preseason numbers, and by the way, it looks like he's going to be maybe fined or suspended next season. We take a look at the preseason numbers. He only had 2 carries, but 19 yards. I think that's a good sign. I think they're going to utilize him. He also caught a pass out of the backfield. So I moved him up to RB8. He's currently going as a RB9 on ESPN. I think that a lot of people are a little bit lower on him because they're a little bit concerned. But I'm willing to take him there. I'm taking him ahead of Najee Harris right now. So after the preseason, I've realized that Alvin Kamara could be a guy that I'm looking to draft, especially possibly in the wraparound, early second round if I do go wide receiver first. Wide receiver, Denzel Mims. Now, I never like to draft Jets players, but Mims is someone to watch on the waiver wire. He's not a guy that's going to be drafted, but if there's some injuries or if he gets a chance, he might move up the ladder in the wide receiver depth chart and have some big games. He had a great preseason, 12 receptions, 170 yards, and a touchdown. He was also targeted 17 times, which is insane. And again, not going as a starter, not being drafted, but after those stats, he might move up that depth chart. Romeo Doubs, he was drafted in the 4th round by the Green Bay Packers, and now that gives another weapon for Aaron Rodgers. He caught 8 passes on 15 targets and 82 yards and 2 touchdowns in his 3 preseason games. I think he stood out the most out of any of the Packers wide receivers. We didn't get to see Allen Lazard. But really, Lazard should be the wide receiver 1, but there's kind of a missing piece to the wide receiver 2, and I think that's Dobbs there. I think he's that guy. And right now, he's going as the wide receiver 79, currently going undrafted, but a guy maybe with your last pick or earlier on in the season is a guy that you want to watch for on the waiver wire. And lastly, Isaiah Likely, the Baltimore tight end. Isaiah would not just likely be the starting tight end. I had to throw a little pun in there, but if Andrews goes down, he will be the starting tight end. And he's definitely going to play alongside Mark Andrews, especially after 2 big performances in the preseason. He first had 4 catches for 44 yards in the first preseason game against Tennessee, and then 8 receptions for 100 yards and a touchdown versus Arizona. He also caught all of his targets. Likely is going as a tight end 29 currently, but again, someone that you could pick up off the waivers, somebody to watch out for this season. Now, let's finish off with the fallers after the preseason, and that's Trevor Lawrence. Now, when taking a look at the fallers, I'm looking at guys that are expected to perform well in the preseason that didn't do so well that I'm pushing down even further on my rankings. 2 of them, I really hate to say it, but we'll get to shortly. I'm really disappointed to put him here, but after seeing the preseason, I'm just not too confident. Now, again, it's kind of like the busts and the sleepers. Just because they're falling down my ADP, down my rankings, doesn't mean that's where I'd like to take them at the ADP. If I can get them there down my rankings, that's perfect. I'd still go for these guys. But at the current ADP, they're guys that I'm avoiding. So Trevor Lawrence being number 1, he wasn't terrible. but I'm not big on him this year. I wasn't last year. Called him a bust last year. He was. He played in 2 games, but only managed to go 20 of 33, which isn't bad. It's good numbers for 228 yards and a touchdown. I just expected more out of him in those games for as much time as he played, because he's being drafted higher than Tua. So I think he's fallen down a little bit. Daniel Jones is another guy. He's never been a top quarterback, and nothing out of the preseason really showed that he's going to improve. 20 to 26, 185 yards, and an interception in 2 games. Now, running back Brees Hall had so much potential, and he still does a lot of potential. Easily the best running back coming out of the draft, but his preseason numbers were not good at all. Carried the ball 14 times for only 29 yards. That's just a little bit over 2 yards per carry for how talented a back he is. He didn't even find the end zone. Currently, he's going as the RB18 ahead of Zeke Elliott, which early on before the preseason, I would have said yes, but now no. He's currently going in the middle to end of round 4, which is normally where I'm looking to draft my wide receiver 2. You also have to add in that they got Michael Carter, and he was supposed to go off. And I don't think they're just going to shy away from Carter. I still think they're going to use him in some capacity. So Brees Hall going the opposite way in my rankings. Travis Etienne, another guy that I wasn't excited about, but even going further down in the rankings. Unfortunately, last year, he was out due to the injury and was looking to bounce back in a big way this season. I wasn't impressed with his preseason. He carried the ball 17 times for 52 yards in 2 games, and he only had 1 reception for 10 yards. That's just a little bit over 3 yards per carry. And he's also got to share time with James Robinson in the backfield. And he's only going 2 spots behind Hall. So if you take a look at Brees Hall, Travis Etienne, and Ezekiel Elliott, I'm 100 times going to take Ezekiel Elliott over those 2 guys at that ADP. Now, these 2 wide receivers, very disappointed to put on my followers after preseason, but it's true. Darnell Mooney. Mooney was a sleeper for me. I talked about him when we did the NFC North breakdown. But in the preseason, he only had 3 catches for 37 yards in 3 games. He also was only targeted 4 times as well, and he's their wide receiver 1. Currently, in one of those games, Justin Fields had 3 touchdowns, and Mooney only saw, I think, 1 target that game, which is very disappointing. He's going around Amon St. Brown and Gabriel Davis, who I'd rather have. Right now, before the preseason, I probably would have went Amon St. Brown, Darnell Mooney, then Gabriel Davis. Now it's Amon St. Brown, Gabriel Davis, Darnell Mooney. Also, wide receiver Sky Moore. And this guy can still break out this season, don't get me wrong, but I was really hoping to see him, especially since Mahomes played 2 games there in the preseason, see him break out a little bit. He had 3 receptions for 23 yards in the first game, which is not bad. But he was only targeted once in the second game, had 0 receptions. My concern is, you have a lot of new wide receivers there. Juju Smith-Schuster is going to be the number 1. And Sky Moore might just be sitting back there as a guy that might be a streaming option in a week. But I don't think he's going to be enough or worthy of being drafted where he's at right now to be consistent as a potential wide receiver 2 or flex option. 2 weeks ago, I drafted Sky Moore really high on him. Right now, after the preseason, falling a little bit for me. And lastly, we go back to Kyle Pitts. I know it's the Kyle Pitts hate show, but everyone's going nuts about him. He had 1 catch for 52 yards. Everybody went nuts. But that's all we saw out of Pitts. I would have liked to have seen more of the connection between Pitts and either Mariota or Ritter in the preseason, but we didn't get it. So I have him moving maybe a spot or 2 down in my rankings because of it. Guys, that is it. It's been a long bunch of weeks. I don't even know how many it's been. I think we're close to 10 weeks since we started our fantasy football outlook and previews. That is it. That's all we got. So I did all this homework for you. I hope you utilize it. go back and watch my divisional previews and breakdowns. Last week, we do my rankings. We did the top 15 at each position. And hopefully, the Sleepers and Bust podcast helps. So, what's going on from now? Well, next week, I'll probably do a recap of my fantasy drafts, as well as we got to talk about sports betting. This is the Sports Luck podcast, and all we do is give you locks week in and week out. So, we're going to go over every game, talk about the bets that I'll be placing. I'll let you know who I would take in each game, who I think is going to win, as well as an absolute lock bet of each week that guaranteed to win you money, whether it's going against the spread, going with the spread, money line, you know, we're going to look at it all. Maybe a couple parlays. Maybe we'll tease a couple. We're going to look at all the sports bets. I'm going to give that to you, as well as possibly some daily fantasy guys that I like for the week. So that's kind of what we're going to do week to week moving forward, since this weekend is pretty much the last weekend you'll be drafting your fantasy teams. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me on Instagram at Sportsluck Podcast, or simply comment on this video if you're watching on YouTube at Sportsluck Podcast. If you're watching on Spotify, Sportsluck Podcast, go ahead and follow me on the other accounts on YouTube. Subscribe and like Instagram. Go ahead and follow. We're gonna have a great season. I hope that if you did listen, that I can help you win some leagues week in and week out. If you have a question on who to start and sit, just reach out to me. But other than that, I can't wait until I draft. I start tomorrow, all weekend long, every day. I got a draft through Labor Day. I'm excited and I feel like I am ready to go. I hope you are too. Again, thanks for listening in and enjoy your Labor Day weekend and your drafts. And we'll see you next week for NFL Week 1 predictions. Have a good one.